Maybe you have a story to add to these. For some of us, our decision to follow Yeshua comes with a high cost. And truthfully, as tough as these situations seem, others have paid a much higher cost for their faith. And this takes us to this week's study. We'll start at Matthew 5:10. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
All of the disciples of Yeshua and many of his followers throughout history have faced horrible persecution, losing their families, beaten, stoned, hungry, burnt alive, hung on a cross. One of the greatest evidences of the truth of the gospel is the deaths that the early followers of Messiah faced. The fact that not only were they willing to die for their Messiah, but that each of them faced these horrific trials with such joy can only mean one thing. It proves that what they witnessed of Yeshua was true. Nobody would die for something they knew was a lie, but an even greater witness is the joy and strength we see in many facing persecution and even death.
Now, it's important to note a few things about this. Followers of Yeshua don't look for persecution. We're not looking to be killed to gain some heavenly reward. Unlike terrorists who kill themselves to kill others, believers willingly walk into some of the most dangerous situations to bring life to others through Yeshua, to give, serve, and share the gospel of peace.
But it's not a suicide mission. We're always seeking to live another day to serve the Messiah. But we're not backing down from threats and trials, but pushing through the fear of rejection and trials so that we can help others. Some men sold themselves as slaves so that they could reach and help other slaves. Some took on governments and religious establishments to bring the Word of God to the world. But the key of it all is their drive of love towards their Messiah and love to other people to whom they were sent.
In 130 AD, there's a letter describing this phenomenon of persecuted believers to the Roman ruler Diognetus that summarizes their conduct and vision. They are in the flesh, but they do not live after the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws, and at the same time surpass the laws by their lives. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things, and yet abound in all. They are dishonored, and yet in their very dishonor are glorified. They are evil spoken of, and yet are justified. They are reviled and bless. They are insulted and repay the insult with honor. They do good, yet are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. They are assailed by the Jews as foreigners and are persecuted by the Greeks. Yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. To sum it all up in one word, what the soul is to the body, that are Christians in the world.
This is a pretty amazing insight. There's a transformation that happens as we draw closer in our relationship with our Messiah. We start to see things not from the here and now, the struggles and trials of today, but our focus changes. We put our eyes on God and draw our strength and joy from that relationship and the eternal kingdom of God.
In the book of James, he writes to the believers scattered through the nations, encouraging them to count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And as you look through the Psalms of David, you see a similar pattern. David was pursued and persecuted by Saul without cause. But in the midst of it, David gave his faith and praise to God.
Some scholars believe he wrote the 23rd Psalm and others at Ein Gedi when he was in the middle of hiding out from Saul, who had been chasing him for years. David wrote, "Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Adonai forever."
David wasn't just focused on the problems of here and now, but was looking to the reward of dwelling with God in His presence forever. Our focus can be our weakness or our strength if we choose to set our mind on God and on His love for us, to remember that even in the valley of death He is with us. We will be victorious. David believed in the midst of his hardest trials, when all seemed lost, he believed the words God had spoken to him, that God would protect him and sustain him. But beyond blessings and provision, the key aspect you can see is the close and loving relationship you see between David and God.
As followers of Yeshua, we see that He uses these trials to bring us closer to Him, strengthen and refine us. These hard times can make us the men and women that He's called us to be. Just like with physical fitness, if you want to get stronger, you need to push yourself, and the pain you experience with the tearing of the muscles is what causes the new muscles to build stronger. In the same way, God is preparing us for greater responsibility by the trials we endure. But how do we gain the strength to endure these trials, to forgive others, and live in that sort of victory? Let's go back a few verses to see.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. I think this verse can be a little overwhelming when you first look at it. But remember, it didn't say perfect in action, but pure in heart. We aren't born with a pure heart. This is why we need Yeshua. Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" King David knew his state as he cried for God to create in him a clean heart. And in Proverbs it says that out of the heart springs all the issues of life. So here's a few practical tips to keeping your heart right.
Bring your inner pain to the light. Admit the hurt to yourself and to God. Deal with the past and don't just keep the wounds to yourself. Invite God to help and pray over your pain and disappointments.
Number 2, forgive those who have hurt you. Forgiveness is the key of all inner healing and transformation. And it's not always others you need to forgive. Sometimes you need to forgive yourself. This requires a lot of prayer, like step 1. Talk to God, but then if possible, talk to the person who hurt you.
Number 3, turn from your old behaviors. We need to take action. Don't think that just because you say you're sorry, that your behavior automatically changes too. Find practical steps to change, ways you can prevent that offense from happening again. If it's an addiction like pornography or drugs, get someone who can hold you accountable and pray with you. You may need to do physical steps to avoid the temptation. Be zealous to get rid of sin in your life and seek help from other believers to guide you in your path.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. In this section of Matthew, Yeshua was talking about character qualities, not individual acts. He was describing the process of our becoming like Himself, complete in the fullness of the qualities of God. Peacemaking is the result of that process. When our will is completely surrendered to God's will, and we are walking out our lives according to His principles, then we are considered peacemakers and sons of God.
Peacemaking is an active process. Just as Yeshua reconciled us to the Father, His call is the same for us, to bring that peace wherever we go. We're to share what Yeshua did for us, and not just talk about it, but take action to reconcile. This peacemaking isn't just between us and others or intervening to help break up fights. God also called us in the same way to help reconcile others to Himself. Paul says in his letter to the Romans, "While we were yet enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of His Son. How much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved by His life?" The biggest peacemaking task for us is to help others be reconciled to God by our Messiah, Yeshua.
And one of the greatest testimonies of this peacemaking effect is right here in Israel. Many terrorists vowed to destroy Israel and the Jewish people. After encountering Yeshua, they've now become some of her most ardent defenders and friends. The only true peace process proven to work against the most bitter of hatred is the good news of Yeshua, our Messiah.
Going back to persecution, there is a reason that the followers of Yeshua were persecuted, and that you too will face anger and hatred by people who don't believe in Yeshua. The role of a peacemaker is a very different role than a peacekeeper. Yeshua was light in the midst of darkness, but man preferred darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. So they worked to put out the light. The light of Yeshua shows every sin, self-centered desire, and lifestyle that is hidden in darkness.
If you are walking with God, obeying His word, and living a holy life, you will stand out. Living a righteous life will surely draw fire, as the life you live clearly shows unbelievers something is not right with their lives. If we endure with Yeshua, as the prophets and the great ones of old, we will share in His reward. This is an amazing promise when we believe His word and look towards His kingdom. Then we can truly face these trials with joy, knowing as we have shared in the fellowship of His sufferings, that we will also share in the joy of His salvation and victory.
Being pure in heart, being a peacemaker, and endurance in trials are some major areas to be praying for this week. Make sure you are digging into the study guides and take the study a day at a time. Don't rush through the teachings. God may need to speak to you on one area specifically, and you may need time to process and receive prayer from another believer to help break through your problem. Connect with us if you need prayer and invest consistent time in praying and the study through the week.
Remember, like everything in life, with the amount you invest into it is the measure that you will receive. It's about building a healthy and lasting personal relationship with God and with other followers of Yeshua.